Welcome to PreZence Podcast. This week, we are joined by an incredible leader, Dr. Markel Quarles, who is the Associate Vice President of Student Affairs at CSU Bakersfield. Markel, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Cindy. Glad to be here.
Oh, it is such an honor and pleasure to have you here. I know a little bit about you, but our listeners don't. Let me share a couple of your bio highlights. Markel has been in higher education for over 24 years. His focus has been student success. He has served in a variety of roles, which includes being an administrator as well as teaching. He has worked across the nation, focusing on interpersonal development as well as cross-generational leadership. Not only has his focus been within the CSU system, but he's also worked endlessly nationwide to uplift education and students. He's also on the American Council on Education. Could you tell us something about yourself that we normally wouldn't find on paper?
Sure. I played football as an undergraduate. I was on a football scholarship, and that actually was my pathway into higher education. And so I'm very fortunate to been able to be part of that experience, which shaped a lot of who I am in terms of teamwork. And I'm very thankful for that experience. And throughout, no matter what seat I'm sitting in higher education, I do have a place in my heart for our student athletes.
That's beautiful. I love that you said that your path to higher education was actually football and the teamwork, the grit, everything that you learned. It underscores the importance of being in team environments and how we can get to know ourselves a little bit more, learn, evolve. We never know what type of hobby, sport, or extracurricular activity might be what puts us on our future path. Thank you for sharing. Before we get started with some of our questions, I'd like to share with our listeners a little bit about how I met you and why I am so excited that you're with us today. I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it was at a commencement ceremony. This was at Fresno State. You came in with the president's circle to the platform where the dean and then the president would be giving remarks to the graduating students of the College of Arts and Humanities. I also came onto that platform, but I came with the dean's circle. I recall as we were getting ready to enter into the processional, going up into the platform overlooking the students, you happened to be standing next to me and we struck up a conversation. And in that moment, what was profound for me was this human connection. Sometimes we think about graduation and it's a beautiful and exciting time of the year and we get caught up with everything that needs to happen. And sometimes meeting a stranger on a special day for students and striking up a conversation and having that human connection reminds you of the beauty of meeting people. I thought it was really quite a serendipitous way to meet. And then we started to speak a little bit. I was impressed with your kindness and your humanity. Obviously, you're a leader. You have skills that are both what we call the hard skills and the soft skills, or more importantly, the human skills. That is why I was so excited to meet you that day and to ask you to be a guest on this podcast, is because of that human element. I feel that it is so important that we really pay attention to the human element of all relationships, whether it's work or personal relationships. So thank you for your humanity and for the connection that we made on that day.
Thank you. And I do remember that day very well. And so I remember I don't remember the details of our conversation, but I remember when we concluded that ceremony. So this is someone I want to stay in touch with, and I walked away feeling very enriched by that conversation. And it wasn't just about the content of what we talked about, but again, like you said, that shared community, that shared community experience. And it's one of the things that I'm a firm believer that at the end of the day, everything is about people.
Yes.
It's about people. Yes, we have
Yes.
jobs. Yes, we have things that we want to accomplish. Yes, we have things that we task. But at the end of the day, it's about people. And so
Yes.
I try to keep that in mind with whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm involved in, and to make sure that, again, how does what we're doing impact people? If we're working with students, how is what we're doing impacting students? How is it impacting their staff or faculty? But what is their human experience in this process?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And with this in mind, earlier you mentioned that football was part of your path to higher education. What else contributed to you saying, you know what? This is what I want to do. I want to be of service in higher education. I have something to contribute. What was your why in addition to what you learned through football?
Yeah. So my why in terms of how I got started in higher education, I fell into higher education. I had a wonderful mentor who's still very active in my life, who worked at the university and who always looked out. And as an undergraduate student, I became a parent. I had my first child during my undergraduate years, and I was just really struggling. I was struggling with school. I was struggling with football. I was struggling just with life in general, and just
Mm,
trying to figure out a way how to make it all work. And so when I got to the point when I graduated and trying to figure out next steps, I have a little one, family to support. I was working at a grocery store at the time, and so my mentor had approached me about considering an opportunity to do an internship. By this time, I was enrolled in I had been into a master's program, and really for me, that was the idea was to buy myself time to figure out what I might do. That was my motivation. I didn't have a clear path. Growing up, I wanted to play professional football. That didn't happen. And so just trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And so I sat down with my neighbor and we talked about it. My mindset then was I had an opportunity to actually get paid to sit down and talk to students. And versus standing up and bending over and cutting boxes and unpacking groceries and things like that. And I was going to get paid for that money. And that was so unusual for me. And so we met, we talked about the opportunity, prepared me for the interview. And once I got into the work, I loved it and I never looked back. And so that's how I fell into higher education. And I think if I could sum up most of my time here, I think there was a large part of my career to where my motivation I didn't really see the value that I brought to higher education. Other
mhm.
people told me. And so when I know we've had conversations about mentorship and so on, that has been such a key piece for me because people have tapped me on the shoulder and say, hey, I think you'd be good for this. Or here's the impact of something that you've done and how it's helped other people. And those kind of things, they really help me see in myself what I didn't see at all. As I've gone through my career, I've been trying to really give stock to where not only how can I amplify that voice, but also how can I do that for other people as well.
Mm.
And now that I'm on kind of the latter side of my career, how do I bring others along? I'm a big believer in, the person that holds the door open for you is extremely important. It's extremely important to also hold that door open so others can come along as well. I'm a big believer in that, and so that's something that I try to be.
I interviewed Dr. Peter Robertson a couple of episodes ago, and he had a very beautiful way of expressing this idea of opening the door. He called it giving people a hand up. He said sometimes people feel reluctant if they feel they're getting a hand down. And he
Mm,
said, I like to think of it as giving people a hand up to help them stand up. And I like also how that intersects with the idea of holding the door open. Because the truth of the matter is, sometimes we think erroneously that we did it, that it was all us. It's ingrained in our culture of individualism. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being individualistic and having a sense of pride in our accomplishments. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that we don't get anywhere alone. There's always someone that gave us a hand up or opened a door. And sometimes doors do close. That means that there's another door for us to walk through, and that somebody else might open another door for us in a different place, or we might open the door ourselves and then open that door for other people. That's the beauty of life. It takes us into these unexpected places and spaces, but certainly at the core of it is how we do things together in community, even when we don't see it. There's always someone that's been helping us, from the person that comes in to do maintenance work so that your office is clean, to the person making the decisions, to the person making sure payroll is taken care of, to the person making sure that students are registered properly or what have you not. There's so many people always in one way or another sharing their light with us and helping things run smoothly through their piece of the puzzle.
Well, that is so true. And I think it's important along the way to be mindful of when we talk about the human experience. We're likely going to have more success because we've taken care of things on the human side. And to know that, okay, I'm working with an individual that I trust, who I know that has my best interest at heart as a human being, and someone that's not going to take advantage of me, et cetera. And so that makes the work go better, I believe, when we know that we can trust one another.
Happy you raised that idea of trust, because it's something that we don't always think about how important it is in our professional lives. If we don't take a chance and trust people, then again, we can't always nurture those relationships, but also projects. You need to trust that your team is doing what they need to do, and they need to trust that you are doing what you need to do, so that as a team, you're building and you're creating and you're having the outcomes that you need. And that trust is very much so one of those human skills, one of those human elements that is not always quantifiable, but it does impact how people view us as leaders, but also how we lead and how we work together in teams for the highest and greatest good of the people that we're serving, whether we're serving students or serving other people at a for-profit organization. And if we're distrustful of one another, it's very difficult to effectively have certain performance outcomes.
Yes, absolutely. And I just had a thought, and it's even more difficult. You've been on the negative side of being of trust, where maybe your trust has been breached and so on. So if you've had negative experiences, it makes it hard to trust other people. And so I just want to just acknowledge that in this space, that is very real. There's a saying that say organizations move at the speed of trust. And so
Yes.
to the degree to which we're able to again trust one another will help determine our outcomes as an organization. And one of the things that I've been reflecting on related to that is transparency. I'm one of those people that I don't openly display everything that's part of my life and who I am. And if I feel it's appropriate, I'll share. But I'm learning more and more that, particularly in leadership, and especially when you have folks that are entrusted under your supervision, that's important for them to see your humanity as well. And as I think back during the time, particularly during the pandemic, that was really, I think, on display for all of us collectively, because we were, this is something that was obviously that beyond all of our reach. And so I remember having a conversation with a staff member. We were on Zoom, right, as the whole world was. I remember having to go because the kids were home, my spouse was home, and it's the only place I could get privacy was in my bathroom. I'm standing there in the counter and et cetera, and just had to laugh, with the staff member that, yeah, just, I'm regulating the space at the moment. But I think it helped us. One, I think, we can get past all of the work itself and realize here's something, regardless of your title, regardless of,
Mhm.
you know, whatever it is, what role you play, here's something we all share in common. And
Yes.
that was an experience that really taught me a lot in terms of how I work with others as well. Yes, there's work that needs to be done, but I think again, to treat others with respect at all times, to give people their dignity at all times, to provide space for people to be able to lend their voices or to lend their contributions in ways that may not necessarily be as visible or tangible, but maybe that's an area that they're comfortable in. To give you an example, I was working on a project with some folks and had someone who was like, I'm not comfortable being the face of this, but I'll help you build the website. I'm good at it. And absolutely, they were on board, but just, but here's the area they wanted to contribute. And so to be able to make space for that, I think it's important for a leader to be mindful of those things, to give people space to engage in ways that are that meaningful.
We're sinking into these important topics that in an unplanned way, but I'm again thrilled and happy that you brought up this issue of trust and how important it is for our team members to see our humanity. And I think part of the reason is because when people see our humanity, that we're in it together, not only does it build trust, but it also creates belonging. And it's that belonging because we're in it together. It's a very different way of approaching leadership. I think that in the 21st century, we're seeing a big shift in leadership versus the 20th century, especially let's say we think about the mid to the not quite the end of the 20th, but getting towards the end of the 20th, there was this old school way of needing to be tough and not showing vulnerability and leading and moving forward and producing. That worked to an extent. But now in the 21st century, we're really thinking about these larger human themes. I believe that in doing that, we're actually creating not only better work environments, but better outcomes because people feel more of a connection. And the problem is when there isn't a connection, when you don't feel that you are seen, that you can trust members of your team, your supervisor, your manager, etc. There's power in showing our humanity. Brene Brown talks about the power of vulnerability. There is power in that. It doesn't mean that we break down, but it means that you can see that I also have to make conscious choices to show up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're responsible for how we show in spaces. And so, whether, if we're having a bad day, we are responsible for the energy that we carry into a room. And so I think it's important that we recognize that and that we acknowledge that, but also to make space for others to be able to do that as well in a safe way, et cetera. It is mindful of that. When you mentioned about the kind of the paradigm shifting in terms of leadership, I'm glad that more attention is paid to people's experiences. And then if you dig into, those, and you dig into the data and look at why people leave their workplaces, oftentimes there's a sense of belonging component there that, and the trust element there that weighs into that. It's not just about money. It's not just about not being challenged. Usually there are other things that are going on. And so I think it is really important that we do acknowledge that. One of the things I know in my circle, we talk a lot about the African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
And so within our division, within different things that we're doing, again, having relationships with folks is extremely important. And you have to make time for it. It's important to be intentional with those as well, to really nurture them as well. And it doesn't mean you've got to spend the entire weekend with someone, but it might be, let's grab a cup of coffee. I'm always amazed at the things that I'm able to get accomplished in 30 minutes of coffee versus
Yes.
having 3 sets of 1 hour meetings. It's amazing how we can also get things done in those informal ways.
A couple of years ago, I mentored a young woman, and instead of having her come to my office, I felt it would be much nicer if we met for coffee. So every 2 weeks or so, we would meet at a coffee shop. I treated her to coffee, and I was very intentional. I said to her, I don't want you to come to my office, not because you're not welcome. You are always welcome. I don't want it to be a power dynamic. Yes, I am your mentor, but I'm also learning from you. So I want it to feel more equitable, where we're having conversations, we're exchanging informations, and I certainly do have more life and work experience, but that does not negate the fact that I can learn from you, from your youth, from the different ways that you approach the world. I remember that being something very useful, and her guard coming down, not feeling so like, what are we going to do? What are we going to talk about this week? It certainly is a nice way to create relationships in a not so power dynamic type of way. And I think that it's nice to be able to have coffee with people. But if you can't have coffee with people, you can bring in pastries or something where people are able to relax a little bit and enjoy themselves in the process of getting the work done. It's important to remember that it's okay for us to enjoy talking to people and doing the work. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be so stiff.
No, it's so true. I had a colleague once who was very passionate about whenever there was a meeting that he was leading. The first 10 minutes, we didn't talk about work at all. It was, how are you personally? And so people really felt more engaged there because they felt like, wow, this person really cares about me as a person as well. And so in return, they were willing to give more of themselves to the project that they were working on. It's funny when you thinking about the power dynamic, it's interesting. Sometimes we forget as mentors, but it's not about it. It's not. And so to be able to create a space and environment that's conducive for, again, authenticity. I'm a very passionate supporter of mentorship. I think it's something, like you said earlier, none of us have gotten to where we are in life. And it's so important that we do hold the door open for others. And it's one of the things I think with students I'm very passionate about making sure that they are proactive about soliciting mentorship from others. And so I have the pleasure of overseeing a mentor program that we have on campus that is generating just some great outcomes and getting students connected to one another, to folks on campus. And they're doing well as a result because they know that there are people that have their back, that they're supporting them, that care about them. It's such a wonderful thing to know. And so, and no matter what stage of life we're in, whether we're a student, whether we are mid-career professionals, whether we're retired, as we said, we can learn from others. Maybe I want to be a little more technologically literate. So I might need to be mentored by someone who might be a little younger that can help nurture me in that process and help me learn those skills. And so I tell people often that I can think I have about 4 active mentors in my life, and they're all good for me for different things. And so the whole idea that one person can be the end all be all for someone, I think could be a misnomer. And so I can tell someone I have, one person who's just my biggest fan. And they are always going to pick me up if I'm feeling down. They always have something positive to share and remind me of the good things that I bring to the table. Now, conversely, I also have someone who's probably one of my bigger critics. And it gets me to think about things in a way that I don't normally think about them. That's why I purposely have them in my life to help me stay sharp, help me stay agile, help me consider things from a different point of view. And so we have some very spirited conversations, but I appreciate that enough, the nature of our relationship. I also take pride in being a good spouse and a parent and a grandparent. And so I have someone in my life who I really look up to in those spaces. And that's kind of the nature of our relationship. And so we talk about this pretty often. And so I would love for your listeners to really, if they're thinking about Again, if I'm looking for a mentor or thinking about where do I start, start thinking about things that are near and dear to you and areas that you want to grow. And then start thinking about who do I know in those spaces that's doing it well. And I think that's kind of where the competitive piece of me comes out. And with football is that, if I'm trying to accomplish a goal, I want to see the people that are doing it well. So I'm going to try to emulate what the starters are doing, the people that are excelling. The folks that are just like, nah, I don't really care. I'm not going to push myself after those individuals. I want to really empower your listeners to really think about, to really be intentional about the folks that you're seeking out to be part of your life. And your mentors will actually want to know and to hear why it is that you're looking to them for mentorship. What is it that they offer that, or that you've learned about them that you feel would be helpful to you? And so I think those things are all important, and none of us are immune to this process. And so no matter what stage of life we're in. So I get really passionate about it.
It fills me to just hear people speak with passion, but also these are the topics that I'm also passionate about. And if I may tag on to the conversation in terms of mentorship, is books are also mentors. Sometimes we are fortunate to have those one-on-one relationships and have multiple mentors. And sometimes we don't have one yet, and we want to find our mentor. The thing that I have learned about mentorship is that it's not always a very cookie cutter type of relationship, in the sense that you sit down, you talk to someone the way I talked about my experience with my former mentee. Sometimes books can be our mentors. We can read books on topics that we are trying to improve upon or learn more about or grow in. We shouldn't underestimate the power of books. Also, I like what you said, Markel, about you're looking at people who are doing it, have accomplished it. There's people that, again, we may not have a specific relationship with them, but we can find ways to model qualities and attributes that we find admirable and we would like to develop and nurture within ourselves. It's really important to have those human connections and to actually have human mentors, and for us to also be learning and mentoring, but also to look at mentorship outside the box. Say, okay, what can I learn from this book? What can I learn from this workshop? What can I learn? How can I be a sponge so that I'm growing and evolving, so I could be a better person, so that I could show up for myself? And when I show up for myself, I show up for the world. I show up for my team. I help somehow contribute to this world. I wanted to say that, and I wanted to interject one more thing. You talked about your family, and that is something that I admire about you. I don't know your family, and as you said, you don't necessarily share a lot of personal things about yourself, especially on social platforms, but from time to time you do give us snippets of those moments of family life on social platforms. And that's something that I personally enjoy and value, because it lets me see the family man, because it's a lens into that humanity, into you doing the best that you can, living the best life that you can while having a career and also your family. And I love seeing those posts. They don't come up often, but I think they're just really beautiful.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. My family, they are really my motivation in so many ways. I think you're so right that in balancing our family is extremely important. I know for me, really keeps me grounded, keeps me focused, and it's easy to get caught up in the rat race and trying to find careers and trying all those different things. And so it definitely requires intentionality.
Thank you. I am grateful for all these topics and ideas that we've been discussing, I would like to also ask you about your role as Associate Vice President of Student Affairs. What do you think has changed in higher education that is inclusive of COVID, but not just because of COVID? What do you think has changed in terms of student affairs, how students are being serviced and supported in their journey so that they could move on and not only graduate, but also become the leaders that they're meant to be? What has changed, or what is a trend that you may be seeing within this landscape of student affairs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that we've learned, particularly since COVID, is that we as a higher education enterprise have the ability to pivot. We have it because we were forced to. We were things that we never thought we could do. We found ourselves doing, offering programs electronically, teaching courses electronically in subject areas that we never thought could be taught. How do you do chemistry online? I have no idea, but our faculty figured out a way to do that and to deliver quality instruction for that. And so it gave us an opportunity to really look at what we were capable of. And so I think there are a lot of lessons that we've learned about ourselves that I hope that we really continue to pay attention to and to continue to grow in. I think also one of the things that we learn about students is that students like options. As we come back in person, we have a number of folks that do want to be on campus, taking courses in person, but also we have a lot of students that want to take courses online. They want that flexibility as well. One common thing that we have noticed that regardless of how students want to take their courses, we know that they're still on campus. Because we can track that. We know that students are still coming to the sporting events. They're still coming to other social activities and things. They're still coming to Starbucks. They're still studying in the library. They still want to engage on campus. So providing a suite of services and supports that's going to be mindful of what the needs of our students are extremely important. But it's also given us flexibility to be nimble. And so whether we meet with students virtually or whether we listen, being flexible.
I really connect with this idea of being nimble and flexible, because the university is modeling life, not just the bubble of being in an educational program, but life post-graduation, this need for flexibility, adaptability, nimbleness. So you're showing in practice to students what really does happen out there. And at the end of the day, you're an organization also providing an experience. I think it's great for us to look at the way the landscape has changed in terms of student affairs. And I think that it's something that we can model, not just in higher education, but in other industries when we think about hybrid models or how we can adapt to providing services to the audience or the people we serve. So thank you. I have another question. What has been the most challenging thing that you faced within student services? And what has brought you the most joy working in student services?
I think one of the challenges, I'll just use COVID as an example, the impacts that COVID had, not just on all of us collectively, but if you really drill down the impact, particularly on marginalized communities, students having to make the choice between, do I go work and support my family or continue on with my education? And we see that our communities of color have been drastically impacted in those things that they're really, really proud of. We've got more students that are graduating than we have before. We've added a graduation ceremony. Probably more people are completing their degrees, and to see the impacts that a college education has on families for generations is so encouraging. This is my favorite time of year, to see families come together to celebrate their graduate and to see former students come back and see them doing well in the world, to see them be maybe the first one in the family to be able to purchase a home. Those things again that have generational impact. To me, those are the things that are extremely important to be able to see.
Thank you. I wasn't going to ask you any more questions, but I thought it was important to circle back to the challenges that students of color face in terms of, do I go to work or do I go to school? Those challenges are real. I think that sometimes, and this is a generalization, students forget that there are resources, that no, it's not a perfect situation, but many universities, such as CSU Bakersfield, that is a minority serving institution, tries to find ways to support students facing said challenges. Is there any message you might have for someone that might be the parent of a student or a student facing that challenge or knows of somebody? Is there any advice that you can give based on your perspective of leading student affairs?
Yes, I would encourage them that if you're considering coming to school, there are ways to help pay for school. And so hopefully finances should not be the barrier that's keeping you from coming to completing college degree. If you're needing support outside of the classroom, you have resources that can be helpful in those areas as well. And so whether it be being support with in regards to housing or food security, et cetera, we recognize that you're a whole person. The student aspect is just one part of it. There are others as well. And so we want to be mindful of all those things to provide the support.
Thank you, Markel. I do know that you have many services, and so do many other institutions of higher learnings. I'd like to once again remind our audience, if you know of somebody that's going through a challenge, ask them to do research. Usually most universities have a student affairs homepage where they talk about different resources. And it's very important because everybody deserves the right to an education, regardless of our background. I thought that was really important to reiterate. And if you're not in the education industry, but you want to help, there are many schools in higher ed that would welcome any type of support that you can give students so that they can succeed on their path. Last question, Markel, is there any advice that you can give to leaders and rising leaders that you have found important or impactful in your leadership journey?
Yes, I do. I think one thing that's been helpful to me is being willing to say yes has been really helpful. So being willing to say yes and to avail myself to be for opportunities. And yes, I'm not saying you have to say yes to everything, but be strategic about it. And so when leaders follow up and want to meet with you on certain things, you know, to do that and to be ready for that. As I say, you want that's for the job that you want, not the one that you have. And so be always thinking about, you know, what would my next steps look like and how do I position myself to be relevant.
Thank you. That is very important advice. And sometimes we know it and we forget. So we need to be reminded. Thank you for reminding me of these important truths. And I want to say thank you. It has been an honor and pleasure having you on PreZence podcast. To our listeners, to our audience, if there was something that you really enjoyed from today's episode, leave a comment. Until next time. Thank you for joining us on PreZence. For more information on how you can create greater levels of impactful presence in your professional and personal life, visit www.cindyurrutia.com and follow me on social media. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Feel free to post a comment and we'll read it on the show.